What's up everyone, Kevin here from Epic Gardening. Today we're talking starting seeds from start to finish. Now if you've decided as a gardener this year to start seeds instead of going to the nursery and buying seedlings, which of course is an option, then it's really important that you follow along with what's going on in this video because the last thing we would do as parents would be to have a newborn baby, not give it enough food, feed it sort of the wrong stuff, and not even give it a lot of water. Like that would not be a good recipe for raising a child, right? If we're raising plants from seed in our garden, these are some seeds from Rebel Gardens, then we wanna make sure that we've given it everything it needs. Otherwise, it probably actually is better to buy seedlings because at least you're guaranteed that someone did something right in that process. So what we're going through today is everything that I currently do to make sure my seedlings get off to a really nice and healthy start, from lighting to wind to watering to soil mixes, etc. Everything will be covered in this video, and you're gonna see me start a mixture of lettuce, herbs, and vegetables for my 2020 garden. Let's talk materials for starting seeds. The first and most crucial thing you'll need is some kind of seed starting tray. Now, do you need one that has as many bells and whistles as the one that I have here? No, you do not. You can completely reuse something like an egg carton if you want to, so get creative. But I will talk a little bit about this particular one because it has a lot of features that help in the seed starting process and kind of gives you an idea of some of the things you can think about when you're starting seeds. So the first thing that you have is just the actual tray insert. So there's 4x6, there's 24 cells here that I can start seeds in, so 24 different seedlings that I can plant. And then I have a little bottom here that has a bit of a riser, and so this is just a wicking mat. This wicks up water, gets nice and full, and this is our water reservoir. So we fill this up, we put this in, we moisten this, we fill this with soil, which we'll talk about, and then the bottom is open. And so what's really nice about this is that helps water wick up through the soil here. Boom, we put that on top, and then we have our humidity dome. So any tray works. I would say the bare minimum for a tray is you're gonna want something to cover it with, and you're gonna want some kind of cell insert. You can get a standard, what we call a 10-20 propagation tray. It's 10 inches by 20 inches, that's why it has that name. And those will come with inserts, 20, 25, 72, 100 cell inserts, depending on how many seeds that you want to start. But the most essential piece, again, is your seed starting tray. The next thing you need, in my opinion, is going to be some kind of heat mat, seedling heat mat. What this does, as the name implies, you plug it in and heat will radiate upwards. This thing gets nice and warm. And the reason why you want that is because unless you're starting seeds indoors above 65 degrees Fahrenheit, most seedlings want to be in that 65 to 75 degree range before they understand that it's time for them to start their life. They need those temperatures to signal to them that, hey, spring's coming, it's time to get out of the ground and actually start growing upwards. Now, the next thing you'll notice is I have a giant LED grow light here. We'll talk about some different grow light options, but suffice to say, if you do not have a grow light when you're starting seeds, especially indoors, your seeds are gonna have what we call a legginess or a stretchiness, and that's because they're hungry for light. Seedlings are really, really hungry for light, and so a grow light is absolutely essential. Now, this is an example of a grow light that's probably a little bit more accessible. It's a T5 fluorescent grow light, which is the same type of light that shop lights will use, like in your warehouse or your work shed or whatever. So these ones put out a decent amount of light, relatively energy efficient, and ones like this in particular, this is the Sunblaze T5, they're going to have some kind of reflective coating so that the light is directed downwards at the seedlings. So the things you absolutely need: some kind of seedling starting tray, some kind of way to keep them warm, seedling heat mat, and then some kind of light source. Now, I wish I could be more specific, give you actual recommendations, but it really will depend on your budget, where you're growing, etc. So just think about it in those terms: something to hold the seeds, to heat them, and to light them. The next step in the seed starting process is, of course, the soil. What are you putting in the tray to make the whole process work? Now, there's a lot of different things that you can use here, but the general guideline is going to be using something that is sterile and fine-grained. So I'm scooping out here some fine-grained material. This is actually a mixture of coconut coir, perlite, and some compost, but the key feature is that there aren't any large particles. It's not really like a chunky mixture like a garden soil. It doesn't have a lot of wood products or bark. It's fine-grained, it's sterile. The last thing you want to do is go out into your garden, grab some of the soil from your raised bed or whatever, and throw it into here, because you're going to be introducing potential pathogens, mold spores, etc., that a seedling is just very delicate, and you don't want to start it off struggling against anything that it doesn't have to struggle against, right? And so what I'll do here is we're going to take this and we're going to fill up all of these cells, lightly moisten them, and then we'll go ahead and talk about the actual planting process. So as you fill these up, the thing that you'll be tempted to do is just fill them up to the brim and then move on. And it's okay to compact down your seed starting mix just slightly to make sure that there are no air pockets or anything like that that would interfere with the ability of the seed to get off to a good start in life. So you want that soil to be nice and compact, of course not overly compact, but if you're using a nice fluffy mix like this, even if you press it down slightly, it shouldn't be a huge deal. So just fill it up. I like to kind of fill it up and then level it off afterwards. Sometimes, like if you're filling these trays up, the edges can get a little bit light because you're hesitant to pour over the edge and spill. And so I'm just fine with being a little messy with it. And we'll go ahead and really, really give it a nice tamp. Move some stuff to the edges, give it a nice tamp, and really make sure that everything is nice and compact. You'll notice like some areas where you tamp kind of falls down into the cell, and that's because it wasn't as densely packed as some of the other cells. And so I just make sure that everything is nice and compact. And then what I do is I can just brush off the excess this way. And we can also sweep off some of the excess and save it if we want to. So now we've got our cells, right? We've got our 24 cells. We're gonna pop out some of these Rebel Garden seeds and decide what we want to plant. So we have our 3 packs of Rebel Garden seeds. We've got herbs, and we have vegetables, and we have lettuce. So we're gonna plant all those, but a couple things that you'll want before you start getting into the planting phase. Number 1, Sharpie. 4, number 2, some kind of plant label. I really like these recycled wooden stakes because not only will they eventually break down in the garden, but I don't like using plastic if I don't have to. And so the reason why is because 100% you're going to forget what you planted unless you label it meticulously. And I'm someone who has a pretty darn good memory, and I will still forget. And so unless you have the magical ability to understand everything that you've planted like a photographic memory human being, then I would highly recommend labeling absolutely everything. So we're gonna crack open these seeds in this pretty cool biodegradable reusable packaging, which I think is really cool. A lot of seed companies don't do this. Rebel Gardens does. The seed packs inside are also recyclable, compostable. And let's go ahead and plant. Okay, so we're gonna start off with the lettuce because it's an easy germinator, and we in general want to plan out one tray with things that germinate at similar rates, right? And so we've got our, let's see what we have. Black Seeded Simpson, Speckles, Little Gem, fantastic variety, Batavian Ariana, Red Leaf, Bistro Blend Mini, Butter Crunch Bib, and Gourmet Blend. So I'm gonna skip the 2 blends just because we only have 6. I want to plant 4 of each, right? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. So we're gonna go with these 6. And when it comes to lettuce, again, like I said, pretty easy germinator. You don't need to sow these too deep, but the very first step that I personally like to go through is I grab a little poking stick of some kind. We depress the soil just slightly here because this is gonna be the hole that we plant our seeds in. Now, a really common question at this phase is gonna be, how many seeds should I put in? And so that's where seed math kind of comes into play. Your seeds all have a germination rate. It's the percentage out of 100 that will germinate successfully. So if it's 90, obviously, 9 out of 10 will, 1 out of 10 will not. For that reason, I like to plant more than 1 per cell. I like to plant 2 or 3, especially for a cheap, inexpensive seed like lettuce. You can really get away with it. It's not a big deal. So we've got our Butter Crunch Bib here, and I sprinkle maybe 2 or 3 directly into that seed hole, and then I just move on down the line. I mean, this is extremely easy part of the game, but what you have to remember is, again, you want to label everything. So what I'll do is I grab my little stake and I write down Butter Crunch Bib, and then the date, because you really want to know the date. Today is the 17th. 2020. Yeah. So if you don't know the date, you don't know when you started them. And if you don't know when you started them, you don't know when they need to go out into the garden. So let's go ahead and finish the rest of this up, and we'll move on to our next category. So what we want to do now is just gently cover over those seedlings, or those seeds, and should be good. Lettuce is, again, a shallow sown crop. So 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch is all really you need to do. Just basically putting a little bit of soil over the top is fine for them. We'll give it a nice little compact, and then we're going to gently water it in, just to make sure that we have adequate water penetration in this soil mix that we've got here, our seedling starting mix, and our seedlings are getting that signal, that moisture signal, to begin their life, which is the whole point, right? That's what we're doing. We're trying to get these seedlings off the ground so we can get them into our garden and kick them really off to a good start. So light water pressure will come over the top, and just make sure we soak this one more time, and we are good to go. Just let that settle in, and we're good to go. So I've planted out all of our seedlings. We've got some more beans and herbs in addition to the lettuce that we planted. Now, you might be asking, what about the light? Shouldn't the light be on? Well, no, because our seeds are germinating under the soil. They only need light as soon as they come up. And so as soon as we start seeing some things pop on, then we can go ahead and discuss light. But for now, I've got them in my trays. I've gently tented the humidity dome here, just in case there's some excess moisture buildup, but it'll keep it nice and moist in there. I've got my Seedling Heat Mats on, and now it's really a waiting game. We're gonna check it every day or so, just wander in, see how they're doing, see if there's anything that I need to change and adjust. But other than that, we are waiting for these seeds to germinate. It's been a few days since we planted our seeds, so let's go ahead and pop the humidity domes off and take a look at what's going on. Here's our tray of Rebel Garden's lettuce seed, and it is looking pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. Lettuce being one of the quicker germinators out there, you can see that almost every cell has a germinating seedling. So at this point in time, that's really all there is to it. You're checking on your seedlings, making sure they're coming up, making sure they're adequately watered. You know, I do have these bottom water trays, which is nice, but you may want to come through with a hose and give it a nice little sprinkle if you start to see the top of the soil dry out. Because remember, it's a sensitive little root that's being developed down there, so you want to make sure you're giving it enough of the nutrients and the water and the oxygen that it needs. And if you want, you can come through and thin out some of the early seedlings that have already come up, so that you actually give them the opportunity to grow really healthily in their cells. We'll be back probably in a few more days to check on the process. So before we go, we actually have to talk about lighting. It's a really important process in starting seeds because, of course, as soon as they come up out of the ground, they're light hungry and they're just ready to get going with their life. And so the most common question people ask is, okay, well, what kind of light do you use for seed starting? Can I just start them on a windowsill? And the answer really is kind of no. You can't really start them on a windowsill. What you're gonna get is something called etiolation, where they'll stretch out towards the light, because even a south-facing windowsill around wintertime, it's just not putting out enough light. And that's why I have this pretty fancy LED panel. Now, you don't have to use an LED. You can even use a T5 fluorescent shop light, the thing that you would use in your workshop or your garage. That'll work perfectly fine, but you do have to use some kind of light. Now, this is a Next Light Veg 8, which is a little bit crazy, like I mentioned, but down there, I have a Agro-Bright from Hydro Farm. I believe it's maybe $80 or $90. Not that expensive, and it runs T5 fluorescent lights, which are pretty energy efficient. Not as efficient as an LED, but still pretty good. And you want to just put them as close as you can possibly get them to the surface of your plants without burning the plants up with too much heat or without drying the soil out too much. So I would say anywhere from 6 to 12 inches is a really good distance. In this case, we're right around that 12-inch mark, and this is a pretty high power light, so they're gonna do just fine here. This is mandatory. As soon as your seeds start to come up, what you're gonna do, and what I'll show you here with all the lettuce, since the lettuce has already come up. So I can move this over. We can move our lettuce over right here that we just thinned out, and now this lettuce, all these early seedlings that have popped up, are going to be exposed to a lot more light than they would if they were kind of over there in that corner. It's been a couple days and our lettuce is all coming up really nicely. What you'll notice though is that, look at it. We have one, we have two, right? So why do we have two? Because we planted two. And what we want to do is come through and just clip off one of them because we're only wanting one per cell. We don't want the roots to compete with each other and crowd each other out. And so we just picked one off, and we can go through, and I've already done this to the rest of the ones here, but it's just called thinning your seedlings out, and you want one cell to be one plant. You want one plant in there because you want the roots to just really expand and grow, and they can't really do that if they're competing with other little seedlings. It's going to be the same thing here with the cilantro. This is clearly the more vigorous seedling, so we're going to go ahead and clip that one. And it's very similar over here. We're going to clip that one, and then over here, this one's coming up a little late. Clip that one off, and we're good to go. So at this point, we've reached the end of the seed starting part of gardening. We've got these lettuce seeds. We have some more Rebel Gardens herb and vegetables germinating over there, but lettuce germinates really quickly. It's a good example to show you how to go through this process. Now, at this point, you're thinking about, hey, when do I actually get these into the garden and start growing them? That's the whole point of starting seeds, right? So there's a few considerations here. Number one, a really good time to transplant. You want to make sure that you have enough root development that transplanting them is actually going to go well, right? And so one way you can do that is, you want to make sure the soil's wet. You can grab like a knife and kind of pop one of these soil blocks out of the cells and take a look at the root system. It should be starting to really permeate the entire cell insert here, and you know at that point it's a good time to transplant it out. If it's not there yet, then you want to keep it in here, keep it well watered. You may even want to give it a light diluted fertilizer if you're using a seed starting mix that doesn't have a lot of inherent nutrition. Like I said in the beginning of the video, my particular mix I chose was coconut coir, perlite, and a little bit of compost. So it might be a little light in nutrients. I could give it a nice diluted little fertilizer to make sure it's really nice and healthy before it goes out into the garden. But if you're using a classic indoor seed starting mix, you don't really need to do that. You do want to wait until you see at least one set of true leaves. It's a good idea. That's a good indicator for the plant being in a spot where it's ready to be transplanted. And then at that point, what you want to do is you want to grab them very delicately, pop them out, make a depression in the soil in your raised bed or your in-ground bed or your container, however you decide to grow this plant, and pop it in. Make sure that the soil is compressed, but not overly compressed. Don't get in there and push it down like crazy. You want to just let the water do that. And so what I mean by that is when you pop it into the pot or the raised bed, you'll want to give it a nice light water to help firm up that connection between this little cell of soil and the actual soil in your garden. That's what allows it to kind of settle in. You don't want any air pockets in there. I mean, you want some, but you want it to be naturally occurring in the soil. You don't want it to be this sort of block and then there's like gaps around it. And that's what the watering will do. And so really that is the basics of seed starting. It's a fun process. You get access to many unique varieties. You're not going to go to a nursery and find some of the varieties, for example, that Rebel Gardens has. This Little Gem is often one that you can only grow from seed. Speckles really depends. So there's a lot of variety at your disposal. When you're growing from seeds, there's a lot of experimentation and fun. You get to perfectly control the health and timing of your plants. And you know, all of that leads to a better time in the garden. So I thank you for watching this seed starting guide. Really hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in more of my work, that can be at epicgardening.com or on YouTube, it's Epic Gardening. Really everything's Epic Gardening. And you know, there's a whole lot in that universe as well, but you know, this is a video for Rebel Gardens and I really hope that you enjoyed and you got some value out of this and you have some really good luck this year in the garden.